In. All right. So thank you for being here, for taking the emergency break off. My name is Jordan Freed. I am a MAPS executive coach. I've been now coaching with MAPS. April of next year will be my 8th full year. And in that time, I've done about 13,000 one-on-one coaching calls. So if you're an agent on this call, I know that you're mental. I am I am fluent in realtor-ese. And so I'm excited to talk to you all. Now, a couple of things. One, if you're a MAPS coach, this is very much the same presentation that I gave at the last mega camp. So this is going to be a little bit of repeat for you, but if you're a coach, I already know that you're learning based, which means that you often need to be reminded of something more than you need to be taught something new. For those of you who have ever attended my full day course, my Freed Life, there's a little bit of snippet from this into the material today, and I trust that you'll look and find that. But really what I wanted to talk to you about today is a different approach to the relationship that you ultimately have to your visions and your goals, because I've been kind of endlessly fascinated by why it is that every one of you on this call knows exactly what to do. You know exactly how to do it. You know exactly why to do it in order to improve your lives, your businesses, your relationships, whatever, and you don't do it. And I'm so shocked by the amount of information that is available to us and the number of people who, for whatever reason, just can't seem to get into and maintain a healthy relationship with their goals or visions. And what I really want you to understand here today is that relationships are everything. And what I mean by that is if I ask you about your relationships, like how are your relationships? Here's what you're going to do is you're going to tell me about your personal relationships, your spouse, whatever. And that's not exactly what I mean. So what I first want you to do is write down this definition of a relationship, and I'm going to say it slowly. A relationship is simply a connection to a person, idea, or a concept. It is simply a connection to a person, idea, or a concept. So when I explain this to my own coaching clients, the way that I explain relationships is I think of a relationship to a person, idea, or a concept as an energetic bond. Now, it's an intangible thing. It's an invisible force. It's not something like, hey, if I asked you to take the relationship that you have to your goals or to your life, and I said, hey, will you go get that off of the shelf and put it in a package and mail it to me? You wouldn't be able to do that, right? It's an intangible, it's an invisible force. But all of you have relationships to people, ideas, and concepts. And I'll never forget when I was listening to one of the One Thing podcasts, and I heard Jeff Woods, who was the person at the time running that company, say that people don't need a different way to set goals. We don't need a different system for setting goals. That is done. There's 1.5 million ways to do it. And this quote originally comes from Jay Papasan, but what Jay said was that people need a different way to hold a relationship with their goals. And so whatever it is in your life, whatever it is that you feel like is missing, maybe isn't the way that you want it to be, it's not living up to your expectations, whatever that might be, just understand it's the way that you're relating to it. And I often tell people, you know, if the pursuit of what you're after feels like you are being sacrificed instead of strengthened, then you need to either change what you're after or change the relationship you have to it. And we're going to talk about that a little bit today. And I'm going to share with you some words and things that maybe you haven't heard before, so that you can kind of make sense of this and then use what we're going to cover today to better your relationships to people, concepts, and ideas. But ideally, it's your lives and your businesses. Now, to start this off, I'm going to share my screen here so that you guys can see this. I want to teach you a word. Now, one thing about me is I'm from Kansas, and so things have to be very simple since I'm from Kansas, and I'm going to do my best to pronounce this, but I believe it's pronounced acracasia. Acrasia. whatever. You can see it right there. But here's what this word means. It's the state of mind in which someone acts against their better judgment. It's the state of mind in which someone acts against their better judgment. See, when I talk about people who know what to do, how to do it, why to do it, and then they don't do it, they're practicing this. So you experience acrasia when you are thinking about changing a habit or a behavior you no longer want. So for example, a big one right now for a lot of people as they go through the holidays, maybe is I should quit drinking, right? Or they're taking a new set of actions that would improve their lives. Like I should start exercising. Again, we're in the world of New Year's resolutions. But it's the feeling of should, and it's present, right? Like I should do this, I should do that, but it doesn't lead to consistent action. So I want you to think about this, you guys, because you know how there's like coaches and people up there, they're like, I'm the why guy. I like to figure out why people do what they do. Hey man, that's cool. That's your jam. Good for you. I'm the why not guy. I want to understand why it is that you're not getting after whatever it is that you know you should be doing. And ultimately, I've come to find that this is a big thing or big reason why. And this comes from Stephen Pressfield. He's one of my all-time favorite people, who wrote the book called The War of Art. And he said, most of us live two lives, the life we live and the unlived life within us. Between the two stands resistance. So what I want you to understand is that ultimately, what is keeping you from taking the action necessary is resistance. Now, if you've ever heard me talk before, you know my all-time favorite coaching formula, and I'll say this one slow, is performance equals potential minus interference. I want you to think of interference and resistance as synonyms, as those words can just interchange with each other. But what's keeping you from following through on what it is that you know that you should be doing is ultimately resistance. That there's this invisible force, right? Most of your life is actually governed by invisible forces. And those invisible forces are the things that actually govern your decision making. If you want to know the difference that makes the difference in someone's lives, it is how they make decisions. If you've ever seen like a mosaic, for example, a mosaic is like, you know, it's a big picture, and then when you zoom in on it, it's a big picture made up of a bunch of little pictures. So what I want you to understand is that the quality of your life, your business, whatever, the picture that I'm seeing is that the big picture is, if I zoomed in, all those little pictures are going to be those little bitty decisions that you don't think that matter, most of which actually happen below your level of consciousness. In fact, by the time you're 35 years old, at that point, you have almost programmed yourself just like a computer. And a lot of your thoughts, feelings, and actions happen below the level of consciousness, meaning you don't even know that they're happening. And what I want you to understand is that programming that way, it eliminates free will. And so the resistance that so many of you are experiencing, the interference that you're experiencing, you may not even know what it is. And this is why it's so important to understand the process that I'm going to take you through. Now, I'm not one of those gurus that tell people like, my way is the way, and this is the only way. Anybody ever says that to you, grab your wallet and leave the room. But one of or two of my all-time favorite authors, speakers, coaches, whatever you want to call them, are Tim Ferriss and Brene Brown. Now, in his book, Tribe of Mentors, Tim asked Brene Brown this question, which is, what is one of the best or most worthwhile investments you've ever made? And this is how she answered it. Brene said, problem identification is always a sound investment of time, money, and energy. Einstein said, if I had an hour to solve a problem, I'd spend 55 minutes thinking about the problem and 5 minutes thinking about the solutions. It feels uncomfortable to spend time and resources trying to figure out exactly what the problem is. We want to jump to fixing way too fast. Most of us are plagued with action bias and really struggle to stay in problem identification. I've found that getting clear on what's wrong and why it's a problem is the best investment you can make at home or at work. So there's a lot in there that I want you to understand. And the first thing is that what most of you think is actually the resistance that's holding you back, you're probably wrong about what that is, or you're describing a symptom, you're not describing a cause. And in our everything shows up in 2 day, instant gratification, everything's at my fingertips culture today, we lack the virtue of patience. One of the things that I share with my clients often, and one of the reasons that I think many people enjoy working with me, is I'm a patient person when it comes to unraveling what it is that's holding them back. And one of the things I like to share with them, and I want all of you here to understand as well, is that no one is broken. They get tangled. And what I mean by that is well, I have two little girls, and they're 9 and 7, Leah and Zoe. And I've always been that dad that, like, I'll take them anywhere. I'll go do the Disney on Ice, whatever it is that they want to do. I'll go along. I'm taking 3 of them to Taylor Swift this summer, even though I don't even really care for Taylor Swift. But there is one store that, above all, I hate more than any other store, and that store is called Claire's. I hate that store. And the reason is most of the stuff in there is crap. And so what happens is they go in, and I'm actually kind of frustrated because they got, like, I don't even know, um 3 or 4 gift cards to Claire's just over the last few days here. But they get these little necklaces, and the necklaces are super cheap, and then the necklaces, like, get all tangled up, and they bring them to me, and their little fingers can't get it unfastened. And you know my inclination is just to wait until they're not looking and throw it away so that I don't have to deal with untangling it. My wife, on the other hand, will sit there and meticulously untangle that necklace. Um, Now, what I want you all to understand is that I'm asking you to go on a journey, and the journey I'm asking you to go on is to untangle yourself. But for most of you, if you get a hold of that necklace, you're going to grab it because you're a high D, I take action, blah, blah, blah. By the way, if you're still bragging about being a high D, understand this: your work ethic is an autoimmune disease, and you're great in a company in startup, but companies go through 3 phases: startup, stability, and scale. You're great in startup and scale. You suck at stability. So that whole high D, I'm da, 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 quit. Like, nobody wants to hear that anymore. And what you do is your inclination is to grab things and pull them and see what happens. What happens to the necklace, every one of you, when you grab the necklace and pull it? It doesn't work anymore. There's no space to unravel it. It breaks, right? And so what I'm asking you to do here today is to quit grabbing and pulling at your life. Take the time to unravel and figure out what it is that's ultimately keeping you from getting what you want. Figure out what is the resistance, what is the interference, what is truly keeping you, what is truly preventing you from getting everything that it is that you want. It takes time, it takes effort. And I want to show you a process on how to do it. Okay. Now, before I go there, though, I want you to understand a little bit more in depth of what I mean by these invisible forces, by this programming, right? Now, again, if you've been through My Free Life or any one of my presentations, this might be a little bit of repeat, but believe me, you need to hear it more, hear something, a reminded of something more than you need to hear something new. But here's the process that I'm always looking for when I coach someone, right? If someone comes to me and they're not getting what they want, what they're telling me is I'm experiencing a lack of performance, right? But here's what I've come to know. Your performance is driven by the relationship that you have to possibility. You are always behaving based upon what you believe is possible for you. And listen to what I'm about to say. Your belief in possibility is a self-fulfilling prophecy. But what I know about possibility is your possibility, your relationship to what's possible for you is driven by your programming. So when we start looking at programming, and when I talk about programming, think of it like software. It's the software of a human being. Remember what I said. By the time you're 35, about 95% of your thoughts, feelings, and actions happen below the level of consciousness, just like a computer. Think of it like you have developed a very sophisticated algorithm of you. Okay. And we all are born with something called automation intelligence. You've heard of AI, right? AI is artificial intelligence. All of you have automation intelligence. What's that? See, any behavior, any thought that you consistently feed to the program, it will eventually start to automate because it wants to do things efficiently and it wants to save energy. And look, your automation software, your automation intelligence is largely amoral. It doesn't care if that behavior is one that is healthy or unhealthy. I mean, how do you think it is that people get addicted to smoking cigarettes or vaping or whatever? It's because largely your automation intelligence is amoral. It doesn't care. As long as you consistently feed it something, it will eventually start to automate it and program it. So I hope that you understand what I mean by this concept of programming, but here's what I've discovered is that there's two types of programming, nature and nurture. Now write this down. Life is a game of discovery and design. See, I don't know the percentages. I think it may change per person. But part of life is just discovering who you are, discovering your nature. And, like for example, I'm left-handed. I didn't teach myself to be left-handed, by the way. I was programmed that way. If I had my choice, I would have been right-handed because I grew up in a really rural town in the middle of nowhere. They didn't even have left-handed scissors until I was like in 6th grade. But also like in this again, like I have a tendency towards introversion. I enjoy in most cases kind of being in small groups or even by myself. I don't think I learned that. I think that's just who I am, innately who I am. And so that's the discovery piece, the nature programming of your mind, body, and spirit. Okay. And then you have nurture programming. Now, if you were to explain to a 9-year-old what's the difference between nature and nurture, you would say nature is what you're born with, nurture is what you learn. The way I would explain it today is nature is what you discover, nurture is what you design. The greatest skill of a human being, by the way, is our ability to identify and install our own belief systems. When you learn that skill, performance, world, is your oyster. Identifying and installing belief systems. But the nurture side, right? The design side of us, the stuff that we learn, it comes at us and into us in two different ways, conscious and unconscious. See, there are certain things that you consciously learned. Like, I think most of you consciously learned how to drive. I think most of you consciously learned how to read a book or write, right? But then there's this stuff that you didn't consciously choose. There's these behaviors, these habits, these beliefs that you picked up through your environment. Some of you, and I'm sorry that you went through this, some of you were born into an environment and grew up with a very unpredictable adult, maybe even a few of them. And see, this is why my all-time favorite quote is everyone is fighting a battle you know nothing about. Be kind always. You have no idea what happens in people's lives. I hear the stories, and everybody's got one. And if you grew up with an unpredictable adult, what happens is that part of your nervous system that is supposed to fluctuate between fight, flight, and freedom being an open, expressive mindset. If you grew up with that, oftentimes your nervous system just gets kicked on and it never comes off. And now you're walking around in this perpetual fight or flight and you don't understand why. If that feels like you, I would recommend a book to you. It's called The Body Keeps Score. Read that book and you'll understand more about yourself than you'll ever know. But the greatest example of this that makes it super simple to understand, I actually heard from Gary Keller, because Gary was talking about how he's always been kind of a thoughtful, reflective person. And he looked down one day when he was at college and noticed he was chewing on his fingernails. And he asked himself, why do I do that? Why do I chew on my fingernails? And it was like a month later, he goes home, looks over, his dad's sitting in his recliner, and guess what his dad's doing? Chewing on his fingernails. And so what Gary understood and what I've labeled here is that he unconsciously installed a habit. He wasn't born with it, right? And it's very much still running the program of today. I had a conversation with somebody last week who shared with me that they were grown up in a military family, moved around a lot. This person's very intelligent, had kind of an affinity for athletics, and learned how to connect with people and ultimately build, feel like they got accepted or that they mattered through competing and winning in sports. And so today, that constant need for competition and competing and all those things is running directly in an opposition to where they want to go, but they weren't aware of it. See, this is the challenge. I said earlier, a lot of what you say is resistance or interference. You're labeling a symptom, you're not getting a cause. And the work that I'm talking about in untangling yourself is figuring out where it is that you've got this unconscious nurture programming running the show that may have been running since you were just a little kid. But I really want to drive this home through this. This is I learned this from Landmark Forum. If you don't know what Landmark is, I would encourage you to check it out. Most of what you'll read online isn't true, by the way. It's not a cult. I never had anybody yell at me. I don't know where that stuff comes from, but all the information that you know about yourself, it can be found in three different chunks. And the first one is the things that you know that you know. So if I asked you, for example, do you know how to ride a bike? You'd say yes. Okay, cool. So you know that you know how to ride a bike about yourself, right? If I asked you, hey, are you fluent in Spanish? Many of you would say no. Okay, see, that's the second chunk. Those are the things that you know that you don't know. I know that I don't know Spanish. I'm not fluent in that language, right? But then if I asked you, tell me something about yourself that you know that you don't know, or I'm sorry, tell me something that you don't know, you wouldn't be able to answer that question. And that's what I want you to understand. A lot of this unconscious programming is hiding in a blind spot, running the show today in direct opposition to what it is that you want. And this quote right here is what would ultimately set you free if you would do the work. And it is, until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate. See, we've got to figure out how to bring what is happening in the unconscious into your consciousness, because write this down. Awareness creates choice. What you are unaware of, you have no choice in. Awareness creates choice. So then what we're left with, everybody, is, okay, that's cool. So what's the process of taking the unaware and bringing it into my awareness? How do I actually do that, right? And I found it through this system, or this little infinity sign. This is how I've done it. So first is observation. I want you to study yourself. I want you to just become aware, to turn your attention inward. And then you examine. And then it's just this loop. One of the greatest questions, by the way, in this observation and examination, and I'll show you in a second what I mean in even more detail, But one of the greatest questions that you can ask yourself is, what would I have to believe to feel this way? What would I have to believe to feel this way? That will make more sense in just a second. But doing the work, untangling yourself, being patient, right, follows this process of just observing. And we're going to talk about this right now. When I say observation, studying yourself, again, you might ask the question, well, of what? And this is my best attempt to explain this. It's not the only thing I think that you observe and examine, but this is a pretty good start for a lot of you. We call them Teslas. Observe your Teslas. Examine your Teslas. So triggers. So triggers are things that you have a strong emotional reaction to. By the way, another key skill, a lot of you would have a much better life if you understood the difference between reacting and responding. The only difference is choice. Reaction is just gut level, you just behaving in a particular way. Response is when you curate, when you choose what it is that you're ultimately going to think, feel, and then behave, right? So triggers, I call them the doorbells of programming because they tell you what to pay attention to. I'll never forget. And by the way, a lot of what I cover, you guys, is available on my site, myfreedlife.com. I got the best name ever for what I do, Freed, right? But myfreedlife.com. And one of the things on there is a recommended reading list. So I know I drop books like left and right, and it's hard to sometimes write all this stuff down. But another book that I read early when my first daughter was born was called The Conscious Parent by Dr. Shefali. And inside of there, she didn't say it exactly this way, but this is the way that I constructed it. Is basically, she said, children will trigger you like nothing else. Your own children will trigger you like nothing else. A lot of times that's just because they're a little mirror, right? They're an extension of you. And what she said was, and again, I'm paraphrasing, is anything that triggers you is a potential call to your undeveloped self. Anything that triggers you is a potential call to your undeveloped self. Now, here's what I want you to get. We're observing your triggers. We're observing the things that kind of set you off. And remember the question I asked, what would I have to believe for this to trigger me? What is it? Now we're into examination. Now we're going to pull this down and we're going to figure out what's the origin of this. Sometimes I get asked the question, do I have to understand where everything came from in order to change it? The answer is no. Most of you have no earthly idea how electricity works, but you use it every day. I'm just a person who is deeply introspective and wants to understand why I do what I do. So if you're like me, this is the process, or a process, not the process. But triggers are super important. And again, I just want you to just observe them, examine them. What would I have to believe? What is it that consistently triggers me? The second thing are expectations. Write this down. You suffer at the level of your expectations. So expectations are simply beliefs of should. They actually, in a lot of cases, determine your level of happiness. And left unobserved and unexamined can absolutely ruin everything in your life. So the easiest way that I can explain this is that there's always the way that we think things should be. See, expectations are beliefs of should. And then there are the ways that things actually are, right? So you're always dealing with, here's the should, or some people call this my blueprint. And then there's life conditions, which is reality. Anywhere in your life that you're happy, that you're satisfied, you're content, you're joyful, it's because the way that you think it should equals the way that it is. Anywhere that you are unhappy, by the way, Anywhere that you are dissatisfied, uncontent, well, that's because you have an unmet expectation. There's something that you think should be a particular way and it's not. But see, we aren't given the blueprint of how do we know what our expectations are and where do they come from? And I get that. It can be a little bit challenging. But right now, I'm just providing you the 30,000-foot view. You just breathe and think about, okay, where is it that I think things should be and aren't? Or where do I find myself consistently dissatisfied? By the way, there's so much personal development, like quotes and stuff that I got to tell you, a lot of it is just not true. It sounds good on a soundbite or in a book, but when people say you should never be satisfied, that is so stupid. Like, never be satisfied? Like, that's so dumb. Now, there's a difference between satisfaction and settling. Satisfaction means I did what I could with the time that I had, and if I died tomorrow, I'm good. I'm happy. I'm satisfied with where I am. Settling means that I've come this far and I'm not going any further. But start to really pay attention to your expectations. Stories. Stories. See, write this down. Stories are the voices of your beliefs. If your beliefs could talk, and they do, they show up in the stories that you tell yourself. And one of you's off mute. If you aren't on mute, just double check because you're starting to pop off a little bit there. I don't know who it is. But stories are voices of your beliefs. So just observe your stories. But here are the ones I really want you to pay attention to. Stories of lack and limit. Where do you consistently tell yourself you are lacking something? A resource, time, people, energy. And limit being the limits you put onto your potential. I'm not the kind of person who does that. It's just too hard. And here's the thing, you guys. Here's one of the greatest principles I've ever learned. I can always tell if something, one second. If anybody can help me see who that is, let me know. Here it is.
It's Kevin Harris. Oh, wait, it stopped now.
All right. I got it. Thank you. So I can always tell if a story is a real or a fake limit through this litmus test. Would I teach it to a loved one? So if I'm telling myself I lack the time, I lack the energy, I lack the resources, I will always know that it's a real or a fake story by, would I teach this to my daughter? Would I teach this to a kid? And if not, then you know it's a limiting story. You know that that's something that is concocted in fear. And again, what would I have to believe to feel afraid? What would I have to believe? Right. So just think of all these things as, just like I mentioned earlier, they're the doorbells they're the breadcrumbs to unconscious nurture programming. Now, the next one, language. Language. There are 3 language patterns above all, you guys, and I know I'm dumping so much on you here. I have a tendency to fire hose people, but there are 3 language patterns that I really want you to pay attention to, whether they're coming verbally out of your mouth or you're hearing them in the stories of your mind. The first one is when I, then I. When I get this, then I'll feel that. So what you're doing is you're putting your happiness on layaway instead of experiencing it here now. The second one is, I'll be so glad when. I'll be so glad when the kids are older. I'll be so glad when my business is, we're hitting 10 units a month. But if you notice, you guys, both of those language patterns, they move you out of a time zone. You only exist in 3 time zones: the past, the present, and the future. And these language patterns, they find ways to keep you out of the present moment. And then the last one is, if I just had the time, if I just had the money, if I just had the relationships. Again, it's your admission to a lack of resources as the reason why you're not getting what it is that you want. Next is avoidance. What are the people, places, and things that you actively and consistently avoid? What are the people, places, and things that you consistently and actively avoid? What would you have to believe in order to consistently and actively avoid those things? And then states. See, states are a snapshot of your mood, the mood of your mind and your body. And you think through your body, you actually don't think through your mind. And so a lot of us get into this kind of like place where we call it your emotional home. It's the 10 to 12 emotions that or states that you just regularly experience, right? You've conditioned yourself. You ever know those people that no matter what happens, they always find a way to get pissed off? Like they're one of those people that could hit the lottery and they complain about the traffic on the way to cash in the lottery ticket. Or do you ever know those people that regardless of what happens, they always find a way, they always find an empowering meaning, they always find a way to gratitude? So what are the states that you consistently experience? There's an exercise that we take people through on this, and if you go to my site, myfreelife.com, and find the growth tool called self-induced states of choice, we walk you through an exercise that will really help you understand this at a higher level. But this, what I just showed you, is all in an effort from the inner world of you to make what is unconscious conscious, right? So this is the inner work. This is the work that you can do with yourself, right? And again, it's just observe and examine. And I think starting with these 6 things is a really solid foundation. Now, the next one is through others. Now, when I talk about others, all of us have certain tendencies, habits, programming, whatever, that again, it hides in blind spots, but they're very obvious to the people around us. So there's this book, one of my all-time favorites. If somebody comes to me and asks me, how do I become a better coach? This is one of the top 3 books I usually recommend. It's called Triggers by Marshall Goldsmith. Marshall is one of the top executive coaches in the world. He's a little bit of a personal hero to me. And anytime Marshall takes on a new client, and most of his clients are like CEOs of Fortune 100 companies, right? Those people aren't hiring Marshall to help them become better at, the technical sides of their job. Like he's not going to help the CEO of Ford understand the automotive industry better than he already does. Most of their changes at that level are behavioral. And because so many people are unaware of what it is that actually keeps them from getting what they want, what Marshall does is he will talk to them first about what it is that they think is the issue and what it is that they think needs to change. Then he conducts what's called a Leadership 360 feedback interview. And his goal is to elicit feedback from anywhere between 6 to 10 people. And the 6 to 10 people that regularly observe this person, So for a lot of you who exist inside of Keller Williams, if you ever wanted to have somebody do this, this is actually a service that we're going to start offering in January of next year. Well, mid-January of 2023. If that's something you have interest in, hit us up on our site and let us know. But essentially what they do is they find ideally 5 people in your personal life, 5 people in your professional life, and they interview them. And they ask them questions like, if you were tasked with taking, let's just say Tom, to the next level, if you were tasked with taking Tom's leadership to the next level, what would you have him focus on? Where does Tom consistently get in his own way? Where does Tom's audio, what he says, and video, what he does, not match? And so what happens is they are creating a system, a board of directors for unconscious nurture programming so that the coach can take that to the person, the client that is seeking change and get to the real issue. Remember, problem identification. And because we're moving at such warp speed, because we pull on things instead of being patient with them, we often build the machine for the problem that isn't. And I don't want you guys to do that anymore. So part of observation and examination is the inner work, observing and examining your Teslas. Other parts is eliciting the help of others. A leadership 360, so to speak. But between those two things, patterns will emerge. And one of my all-time favorite people, many of you probably know him, but his name is Craig Zuber. And Craig and I came up in MAPS together. We started at the same time. And he's one of my dearest friends, one of the smartest people that I know. And he has some quotes, and my favorite one is people who lack clarity repeat patterns. Lacking clarity on the real resistance, lacking clarity on the true interference dooms you to repeating patterns. And my hope is that if you get nothing else out of what we discussed today, but this quote right here, I'll have one as your guide, as your coach today. And here's what it says. Perhaps it's time for you to take a temporary break from pursuing goals to find the knots in the garden hose that once removed will make everything better and easier. It's incredible what can happen when you stop driving with the emergency brake on. So I trust that you all found value in this. For those of you who are interested in a shameless plug, or you want to go through the full experience of what I just shared with you, join us in My Freed Life, the full day session. I just gave you a glimpse. We're going to be in Atlanta, January 19th. My cohort, my partner in crime, Jordan Davis, is going to be in Chicago and Green Bay. You can find that information on our site, myfreelife.com, under our events tab. If you want us to alert you of future events, please reach out to us. My team and I will make sure that you're on our newsletter and that we're keeping you in the know. We're going to 18 locations with My Freed Life in 2023. And if this note, if this glimpse touched you in any way, then I would strongly encourage you to come attend that event, because we'll give you an experience and we'll help you figure this out. So I trust that this was helpful. I trust that this will help you make 2023 one of the best years ever. Thank you for all of you investing the time and the energy here with me. If there's ever anything that we can do, feel free to reach out to us. And I hope that you all have a very happy and safe New Year's. Thank you for being here, you guys.